Hello and welcome to the SPA London Regional Conference. My name is Chris Matthews. I'm the London SPA Regional Officer and I'll be chairing each of our three panels today. We are delighted this is a sellout event, so thanks to everyone for joining us. This is our first panel of the day and it's about finding and keeping your niche. So I'm going to introduce our panelists and we'll have a conversation around the subject and then there'll be time for questions at the end. If you feel comfortable, you can raise your hand digitally on Zoom and we'll unmute you to ask your question, or you can write it in the chat and we'll read it out. Just so everyone is aware, the panels are being recorded as well as live streamed to the SPA YouTube channel. And just finally, the Spark 21 London Awards will be announced via Twitter this evening. So go and follow SPA Journalism if you haven't already, and turn on your tweet notifications. Right, so our panelists. Aniefiok Ekpoudom is a writer from South London who documents music and culture in Britain. He tells stories about the contemporary sounds of the country with a focus on Black British music. He's written for and worked with The Guardian, The Observer, British Vogue, Nike, Netflix, and many more. His first book, Where We Come From, will be released in 2022. Eleanor Sharples specialises in TV and radio reporting on the Daily Mail show business desk. She graduated Loughborough University in 2016 with a degree in politics and trained in journalism at News Associates in London. She did 6 months at press agency Triangle News, where she won the Dennis Cassidy Award for Best Young Talent at the National Association of Press Agencies Awards in 2019. And since completing her Daily Mail training scheme as a general reporter, she's worked as a TV and radio reporter on the Mail's show business team. And finally, Lottie specialises in travel writing and as a freelancer has had bylines in The Telegraph, National Geographic Traveller, The Times and Lonely Planet. She does occasional travel pieces for BBC Radio 4 and runs the Talking Travel Writing newsletter, which seeks to demystify travel media and help new writers get into the industry. So first of all, guys, I'm going to kick off with a question to all three of you. How did you find your specialist niche? And Neve, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, yeah, my niche, as you kind of laid out, is in writing about music and culture in this country, specifically about Black British music. And for me, that was a process of just following what my interests were and trying to find people who had either operated in similar places or similar templates, who were doing similar kind of journalism and writing, and then I guess trying to apply that to my own experiences. So I'd grown up listening to this music, and I felt like when I looked out into like kind of the landscape across like media and journalism, it wasn't necessarily being covered with the depth or the rigor that I thought a lot of the music and the culture surrounding the music necessarily deserved. So that was kind of my intent, to try and blend my love for writing and my love for journalism with my passion for music and try to kind of interview artists, profile artists in that way. So because there wasn't necessarily much of it happening at the beginning, it was, I guess, kind of a shot in the dark, I guess, kind of like figuring it out as I went along, because there wasn't necessarily frameworks or templates or platforms who were used to covering this music or who knew where to find it. So I started a blog, which was really useful back in when I graduated in like 2013. I started a blog, and then just once I had a few pieces of work that I felt reflected my interests and my writing style, I then had something that I could start sending along to editors at music magazines and at some newspapers and stuff like that. So that's kind of how that's how I kind of found my niche, and then got into a place where I could start actually writing about my niche.
Brilliant. And Eleanor, how about you?
So for me, I went straight into the Mail as a general reporter, and it was kind of there that an opportunity arose when someone's kind of moving away from the TV role, and it's something that I've always had an interest in. I like to watch a lot of TV in terms of I've always got my eye on the big dramas, follow the soaps, reality TV. So I kind of felt my own knowledge kind of would help me into that role and kind of get the most out of it as well. So I've been on the desk nearly 2 years now, and it's just been fantastic. 1 minute you're doing, it doesn't just cover kind of the upcoming dramas, I'd say. It really does focus as well on, say BBC's Panorama and a bit maybe more hard-hitting documentaries. So kind of every side of the niche as TV and radio kind of is very different, which is what I love. And yeah, I kind of was really fortunate with the right timing of when I was kind of thinking, general reporting, absolutely love it, but if I am able to go into a particular direction, TV and radio is where I've kind of wanted to go, and it kind of fell at the right time, which was great. So no, it's brilliant.
Brilliant. And Lottie, how about you?
So I sort of knew I wanted to write and travel from when I was a teenager. I went off on some travels before I started university and really enjoyed it. And I ended up connecting with the author of The Rough Guide to Kenya while I was, no, that's a lie. That was while I was at uni. I'm getting lost. So I knew I wanted to work, write and travel. Started university, studied journalism down in Bournemouth, and decided to just tailor everything that I was doing in my degree towards a more international and sort of travel focused angle if I could. So I did that, and then in my final year I managed to go to Kenya to make a film for my final project, and connected with the author of The Rough Guide to Kenya while I was out there, and ended up helping him update the guidebook a little bit. So then that sort of led me into applying for a job with Rough Guides when I graduated. They had a new role on their website, and so I applied for that, and fortunately, because I had sort of weaseled my way into the Rough Guide to Kenya, I was in a pretty good position, so I managed to get the job straight out of uni and went to work for Rough Guides, and I've sort of just stayed within that niche ever since. So I moved from Rough Guides to a small publisher called Love Inc, and I launched a travel website for them, and then now I'm a freelancer doing anything and everything for anyone who'll take my words. But yeah, I think it's sort of I tailored everything I could possibly do towards travel because I knew that that's sort of how I wanted to live my life. And yeah, here I am.
Brilliant. And so Eleanor, you're quite early on in your career. Do you think that this is the niche you're likely to stick with forever, or would you ever think about switching it?
Great question. I think it's one that I absolutely love, like thoroughly enjoying. It's the one I am also very interested in sport, and that's kind of always been my other one. So it's quite an interesting question when you say, like, would I stick with it? It's something that I would love to take a lot further, whether it happened to be in print or broadcast as well. But also I would never rule out kind of my love for sport as well. And if that was another niche, another direction that I was taken in, it's so hard to kind of make those calls. I don't know if the others kind of feel that as well, because when you feel strongly for both of them, it's for TV was perfect because it fell at the right time for me, but yeah, definitely it's something I would like to take further, and I really hope I can with whoever that might be. But also at the same time, sport is something that I'm really interested in, so I always keep on top of the sports news. I'm a big football fan, things like that, so it's quite nice to kind of know that is also an area that I'm really interested in and would love to explore.
Brilliant. Well, what about you guys, Lottie, Neef? What do you think? Do you think you should try and stick to one niche, or is it possible to change niches or have many?
I'll quickly. So I mean, it's been a weird year for travel writers, as you've probably guessed. I haven't necessarily had to change my niche as such, but I've certainly had to diversify a lot more than I anticipated. And it's been quite difficult. It's been hard. I think once you've got your contacts and your reputation in a specific niche, it can be quite difficult to move into another area, and you sort of need that big break all over again. And I still haven't quite mastered that. I've been doing little bits here and there, some product reviewing and the lifestyle pages and some random features for the Telegraph and stuff, but nothing really, nothing major. I haven't managed to completely escape from travel yet, but I've certainly had to diversify. I would say, for me personally, I don't think I would necessarily want to move away from travel entirely, but I'm certainly open to maybe finding another sort of angle on journalism or reporting or writing that complements it, perhaps. but yeah, I think I mean, travel is my passion. There's not really much else I care about. So, well, apart from my dog, but so yeah, I think for me, it's the only thing that makes sense at the moment. But who knows what's coming down the line? I don't know. What about you, Neef?
Yeah, I think it's been an interesting one for me. Definitely, I think sometimes with niches, I think as you kind of burrow down into a specific niche, you kind of find more interests that spawn off of the back of that. So I feel like specifically music, where I've been like for the past 6, 7 years interviewing a lot of musicians, a lot of rappers, a lot of singers. And I've found in like the past year that's kind of evolved from maybe interviewing people about their albums or whatever projects they're working on into, I guess, more sitting an artist in terms of the context of who they are and like the environments that they come from and the communities they come from. And so I think a lot of the work I've done over the past year, specifically with The Guardian, has been more about, although there have been musicians at the forefront, it's been more about exploring like the social context of which they exist in. I feel like that has kind of spawned a new interest, if that makes sense, that has come from my real interest in music, but has kind of now manifested itself into something else. So I think, yeah, in the future, I can see myself branching out of music just because I've come to realize that all of these things are so interconnected and nothing kind of sits in isolation. So I've been starting to explore that more and more often. And then I think also in my role of kind of doing a lot of, I guess, kind of celebrity profiles and stuff, that does now start to lend itself to people who aren't just musicians. So I've, on the back of last year, did a profile of John Boyega for The Observer. I've started to do more stuff with like actors and that kind of thing, just because a lot of these mediums and kind of sections are actually quite interconnected in that way. So yeah, I think niches can naturally evolve if you let them to, but I think I wouldn't try. It's not something I try to force. I just kind of be the same interest that took me into music and into documenting Black British music. I think I'll allow to take me into somewhere else at some point.
Brilliant. And what do you all wish you'd known when you were starting out in the industry? Lottie, should we start with you? Big question.
What do I wish I had known? Oh, so much. I guess for me, the biggest thing, I just wish I'd known how it worked. Travel is a really unusual industry, and I mean, journalism in general is a strange job, I think, particularly as a freelancer. It's a bit different when you're a staffer. Things are a bit simpler, I guess. But I think when I was lucky to start out as a staffer and become a commissioning editor quite quickly. So I got to understand the process of how freelancers get their commissions and stuff. But if I'd gone straight into freelancing, I think I would have been completely out of my depth, because I had absolutely no idea how the process worked. I think I studied journalism at university, and I learned so much, and I loved my degree. But I didn't come away with a knowledge of how the industry actually physically worked and what the process was of finding work and getting work and pitching for work. And I feel like that was, I don't know what it's like now in journalism courses. I really hope that it's changed, but I was absolutely baffled when I came out of uni and realized that this was how it was working. So I think I'd really like to have known that before I went into the world of work, because it was confusing. And I think specifically within my niche, within travel, a lot of people will assume, or lots of people do assume, that the publication that you're writing for is paying for your travel, and then you write the piece and that's it. But that's not how it works, unfortunately. And travel expenses are almost entirely dead for travel journalists now, bizarrely. And so there's this bizarre relationship between the PR and the journalist and the publication, and it's this really tricky balance that you have to try and get right. So the PR, for example, might be a PR for a tourist board, and then there's me in the middle, and then there's the publication that I want to write the story for, and I have to convince the PR for the tourist board to pay for me to go to their destination so that I can tell the story that I want to tell, and then I have to also convince the publication that I want to write for to let me write that for them. And there's three of us within this little circle of travel, and it's difficult, it's complicated, it's quite a sensitive process a lot of the time. So I think if I'd have known that before I got into the industry, I probably wouldn't make quite so many mistakes as I did in the beginning.
Brilliant. And Neef, how about you? What do you wish you'd known?
Yeah, I'd kind of echo a lot of those same sentiments. I came into journalism from a law degree randomly, so I did study law at uni at the University of East Anglia, and then when I finished, I was like, I didn't want to do law. I couldn't stand it, so decided to pursue journalism and writing. And I think just kind of coming into the industry cold like that was quite difficult at times, because I think it was quite hard to get my head around how things actually worked. I think, as Lottie was kind of saying, a lot of the questions I get now from younger journalists is really simple things like, how do you pitch, how do you maintain relationships with editors, and that kind of thing. And it wasn't until I started to sit down with editors and maybe like start to build those relationships where they break down like the music and culture section of their paper for me and be like, okay, we have this section which is 100 words, you need to pitch ideas about this specific thing. We have profiles over here which are usually like 1,500 words, and then we have reviews, and this works like monthly or bi-weekly or something like that. And I think that can be, unless you have that information kind of fed to you directly from an editor, it can be quite hard to pitch cold, because you don't necessarily understand the frameworks that they're working with and that they're working towards, and like the kind of ideas that they're looking for. So I can remember like starting out, when I look back on the pitches that I sent through now, starting out, I'm like, yeah, you didn't really have a clue what you were doing. But it was like kind of like the shooting in the dark thing, as I said. So I kind of learned just by trying and failing. But yeah, I think it would just be the kind of breakdowns of helping people really understand like the world that they're trying to access and to enter, which I think can be quite difficult for people. So yeah.
Right. And Eleanor, how about you? I can see we've got a question in the chat that wonders whether things are maybe a bit simpler or easier for staff writers being not freelance, being in such a big organisation.
Yeah, definitely. I think what's quite interesting is being part of sort of TV and radio, and the Mail comes under our showbiz desk. So what is really nice is, even though we do have quite a small team of 4 or 5 of us, I do have a show business editor. So when I am kind of thinking, right, I've got this story, I want to pitch it, and kind of running ideas past someone, instead of having, for me, probably then having to go to, the news editor or picture editor, for example, pitching these different stories, I do kind of have a sounding board with my show business editor. And that's really helpful, because even being a guest staff, I then don't have to necessarily set it out correctly. I can just, shout over to the desk to her and be like, oh, can I just run this idea past you? This is what I'm thinking. And it's, I would probably say that is an easier element, if that's such, for the pitching side of things. But one of the things that I definitely wish I'd have known, and what was great, is I have always thought I really want to do journalism. I knew that was kind of the direction I wanted to go in. So despite doing politics at university, I tied it in with media and communication studies as well. And then having been to News Associates, just one of the things that I just know is so important is your contacts book, and making and keeping them. And even though I know it sounds silly, you're like, oh, well, you're a journalist, like, that's the main thing. It's actually building up a proper relationship with people, and keeping them, inside, chatting to them so often. And that's definitely something I wish I'd have probably maybe known was so important as it is, as I kind of understand today in my role. And also just kind of going with your instincts. Definitely, like, I kind of wish someone had said, if you're stood and you're really unsure of something, just go with what your kind of head's telling you, because that will probably be the right decision. So that's definitely something those 2 tips I wish I'd have known before I set out as well.
Okay. And just actually on contacts, after you've written a story, do you try and keep in touch with your contacts? And if so, how do you go about doing that?
Definitely. So for me particularly, say for example, there might be, say, a new BBC factual documentary coming out, for example, and it's kind of going along to the event. So we do a lot of screenings, which is fantastic day out of the office. So we go and, say, for example, it might be the new David Attenborough Perfect Planet or something like that, and we'll go down, and I particularly find it's a lot of relationships with PRs, and even getting to know them in that respect, that they might be really helpful with providing extra pictures that I need, or interviews with people. But then thinking, oh, actually, that person was so helpful last time, and get in touch next week and say, what have you got coming up? What's your next kind of big project? Any tips that you can give me there, or any insider information that we could on, and I think kind of building a relationship that way, I've found has been really, really helpful. So yeah, definitely keeping in contact is extremely important. I have a little book actually where I keep all of them down, so that it's just really helpful to have. But yeah, that it's yeah, they're invaluable.
Are you ever worried you'll lose the book, or is that constant sort of struggle?
That is so true. Working from home is a lot easier. I do actually keep everything in a folder just so it all stays together. But no, that's very true. God, yeah, if I lost that.
Okay, so Aniefiok, what advice would you give to people in the current climate who want to go down the path of niche journalism? Obviously, it's quite hard to get into a newsroom at the moment.
Well, yeah, I would say always start by following your interests, I think, or something that start by following your interests. But I think that's important because you can really, in my experiences anyway, you can really tell the difference in writing that where there's a kind of invested passion, especially when you're dealing with like music and culture and that kind of thing. The writing that tends to cut through is when you can tell somebody's really invested in their subjects, but also that I think having a real interest in something leads you to naturally, I guess, put in the extra hours that are going to develop you at your craft and stuff like that. And I think that is like really important in today's climate and today's time. And then I would say massively is just read around the subject that you're interested in and read heavily around that subject, whether it be journalism, novels, non-fiction books, whatever it is. I think trying to really get a grasp of who's doing this thing well and what can you learn from them. I think that's a really important thing, and something I still do today is to just try to find like who are the writers, who are the journalists, who are even the documentary makers that I think are really excelling in this specific field. What are they doing well? What can I gather from them? What kind of resonates with my own maybe writing style or how I'd like to tell stories, and what necessarily doesn't, and try and kind of piece your voice together from there. I think that's super important. I think also always just seeking out advice from people on how to get better. I think that is something I started doing quite early on, just on a whim. I just send random emails to like writers and journalists who I really liked, and I just said, like, would you be able to offer any tips at all? And then more often than not, people would get back to you and say, I read this book, or you should check out this writer, or I do this technique when I'm writing. And all of that advice over the past 6, 7, 8 years has been really, really helpful in my own career. So yeah, I would say always like really study hard on your craft, and then always try and seek advice where you can, because especially in today's climate where is music and culture there are a lot of music and culture writers essentially, and I think you don't necessarily want to be, in my experience anyway, I don't think you necessarily want to be just writing about whatever's current, if that makes sense, because I think there are so many people doing that, and if you're kind of just driven by the whims of what's happening, it's kind of hard to establish your own voice and your own narrative and your own story for your career. And I found that even though it may take a bit longer to do that, if you do stick with the niche or stick with what your interest is, in the long term, that does tend to pay off. Because I found what happens now is that although I was writing for smaller platforms and smaller like kind of blogs when I was starting out, and then as I to kind of slowly build it up into like writing for Vice, and then writing for Clash magazine, and writing for Hunger magazine, and then writing for The Guardian, and now like GQ and places, I found that now when people are interested, or publications are interested, or even like Netflix or somebody's interested in telling a story about a specific genre or a specific musician or something like that, my name will kind of stand out to them because I have this track record of doing it before in the past. And so it's like all of those years, although I was maybe not doing it at, I guess, the executing at the level I wanted to, it was like a process that was building up into now, where I feel like I could confidently go to these places and say, I feel like I have a knowledge in this area, have like a background in covering these stories. Here are like 3 or 4 examples for you. And that I think has really been helpful in my career so far. And it just means I get to do more of the stuff that I love to do, essentially. So yeah, that would be my advice.
Right. And this one's sort of more aimed at Lottie and Aniefiok, but how difficult is it to pitch when you're new and you're up against lots of other journalists who are specialists in the same field? How do you make sure you're the pitch that gets accepted?
It's such a difficult thing to answer. I think a lot of what Aniefiok has just said in terms of, building up a base, even if, if you're really just starting out, building up a base of expertise that you can, you know, show to somebody, a portfolio, even if it's just on your own blog or on Medium or whatever, or even just on Instagram. I often encourage, I run a travel writing course for people who want to get into the industry, and one of the first things I make them do is completely, if they're really serious about getting into travel writing and travel journalism, revamp their social media profiles so that people, when they Google that person, will look at that and go, oh yeah, okay, they are actually engaging with this industry. They've, you know, posted about travel, they've written stuff on their Instagram, you know, that shows off their writing skills. I think having evidence of your talent is so important. Even if you haven't had those commissions, there are other ways you can show that through your social media profiles or through a blog or whatever. And I guess, I think in terms of how you make your pitch stand out, it's tricky because lots of different editors have different ways of receiving pitches and different preferences as to how they want them. I think just keeping it short and simple. I mean, if you can't summarize it in a couple of sentences, then your story's definitely too complicated. I think if you can just keep it short and sweet and succinct and clear, then hopefully it's you know, that'll put you on your way to making an impact on that editor. I don't know. What's your advice, Neef?
Yeah, no, I agree with so much of that. I think that's great advice. I would also say is I think it's important to try and show some value to editors, because I think a lot of the time editors are looking for, and I think it's like kind of our job to show them like why you feel you're the best person to tell that story, essentially, because editors may be getting hundreds of pitches about the same thing from so many different writers. So I think it's important to try and state your claim as to why you feel like you're qualified to tell this story. It may be you've like, say, if it's music, you may have been listening to this artist for a long time, or you may have seen like 4 of their live shows or whatever it is, or you may have grown up in a similar area to them and you understand like where the music is coming from, whatever it is, or whatever it is your angle into showing editors that you have a real authority to speak about this specific pitch with authority, essentially. I think it's important to show that in your pitch, because I think it shows that you are best placed to maybe write this story and like kind of the value you're going to bring to the story. I think that's really important. And I think also is researching where you are pitching to. Because I think a lot of the time you have to, I think it's important to, as much as you want to show who you are and show your writing and send your pitches forward, I think it's really important to show editors that you really understand the platform that you're trying to write for. So whether it's reading through, making sure you have a thorough understanding of the kind of work they commission. In pitches, I usually will send an example of like something else they've previously written and be like, okay, I feel like you published this. I felt like this pitch could sit in a similar space to that because it's kind of about the same subject or it's about the same word count or something like that. Just to show that you have a real interest in the platform that they write for. And also even just showing an interest in the editor's work too, if they are actively writing too. I think all of that stuff is really important when it comes to building relationships with people, and it should be, I guess, look at it as like a, not just a take, but a give and take. So you're trying to set like the foundations for what you hope to be regular and recurrent work. And finally, I'd also say is like be persistent with following up on people. I think when I look back on when I was first starting out, I was like, I think I was generally quite annoying. I feel like I'd email and email and email. If I didn't get a response, I'd email the next week, and then I'd email the next week. I think there was one magazine, I think I emailed them about 9 weeks in a row until they responded to me. And then eventually I got to start writing for them, which was great. And then you realize that a lot of the time people aren't not responding to your emails out of spite or anything personal. It's just like people are really busy. It's a really busy industry and a really fast-paced industry. But I think like if you keep plugging away, usually you will get a response, and it may not be the response of like, oh yeah, come and write for me today. It might be go away and work on this and think about that and do it differently. But I think just keep showing up and keep showing that you're interested usually does lead to work down the line. I think when I think back to my first piece for The Guardian, I think about 2 or 3 years ago, I literally emailed the editor Ben about 8 times and then to no response. But then finally about a month after that, he just reached out on a completely different subject. It was like, okay, we've got this piece, we've got an interview lined up with this American rapper, would you want to do it? And I think just because I'd been in his email inbox and kind of front of mind, that when he did have an opportunity, he like kind of gave me the opportunity to say, okay, you've been writing to me this time, let's see if you can actually do it now. And so I think that stuff, persistence is really important, even if it's even if it's annoying at times.
Right. And how's newsroom journalism changed, Eleanor, during the pandemic?
Yeah, very different in terms of obviously all being at home. But specifically for myself, what has been totally different is I would spend quite a bit of the week going out to events and seeing the new upcoming shows coming out and things like that, having question and answer sessions with the cast afterwards, round tables. Obviously, without being able to go to these places to do that, everything has gone virtually online, as I know most things have, just like this. So actually it is very similar to what we're doing now. So that's been really different on personally for my role, but also even for the wider show business team, for us it's been the fact that a lot of the massive events have been cancelled. So obviously the BAFTAs, the NTAs is now moved. So different things like that has definitely changed our particularly actually the way the start of the year usually falls. It's usually a really, really busy time for that, and has just been a bit different because of the way things have been due to the pandemic. But also in terms of communicating with the desk, obviously usually you can just pop over and just have a chat with someone. Now it's picking up the phone or dropping an email. So things like that have been a lot different, but it's just kind of been a new way of working. And actually a year later it's starting to feel the norm, which is quite scary. But yeah, no, fingers crossed. I have been back into the office a couple of times when everything kind of relieved a bit more over the summer. But yeah, it has been different, but amazing to think that I think it was probably about April that we put together a newspaper with every single member of staff at home. So which is pretty incredible feat actually. So yeah, so no, it's been good but different.
And Lottie, how about you? In terms of obviously travel at the moment, it is where no one can travel. So how have you worked with that?
So there's been a lot of writing about travel restrictions. I think so when the pandemic hit in March last year, or when our lockdown came along, at least, I was actually on my way to Heathrow with my backpack on, about to go away to Peru for 3 weeks, and I was just about to get on the bus and I got a phone call to say, go home. the trip's cancelled. We can fly you out there, but we can't fly you back. So I couldn't go, and then from there, then everything fell apart, and I had nothing to do for about 3 weeks, and it was a bit terrifying. But since then, I've managed to sort of keep going, writing about a lot about the UK. I've been lucky to. I'm quite an opinionated person, and for some reason, the Telegraph likes to publish my opinions. So that's nice. I've been very opinionated and made some money off of that. And like I said earlier, I sort of had to pivot. That word, but I did. I had to pivot a little bit, and I ended up doing some sort of health writing. I signed up to do the Oxford vaccine trial and wrote about my experience getting jabbed in the arm numerous times. And I wrote some other sort of general life features as well. So, but in terms of travel, I have obviously kept my foot in that door. There's been a lot of writing about the UK, and then as soon as we were allowed to travel again in July, I think I was the first journalist for the Telegraph on an aeroplane on the 4th of July. So that was really nice to be, the chosen one to go abroad for them and report on what it was like to travel sort of post-pandemic. Obviously that wasn't really post-pandemic, but we thought it was way back then. So there's been a lot of sort of writing about travel in the context of the pandemic. And actually, interestingly, the travel desks at Papers in particular and digital publications have never been busier, because they're constantly having to, not only are they constantly keeping up with all the news around travel. We've never had so much news about travel. Normally people just go on holiday and have a lovely time and there's not much to report. But all of a sudden the last 12 months have been really busy for the travel desk. So my friends on the Telegraph travel desk are, worked to the bone. But there's also, there's been a lot of opportunity to write about travel within the context of the pandemic. So, even just, I went down to Weymouth for the weekend with my dog, and that became a story. I went up to Hull for a sort of remote festival, and that became a story, just because I was traveling and we were still in a pandemic. And I've also managed to sell some stories of trips and experiences I had, years and years ago. I'm in the middle of writing quite a complex story at the moment about Albania, where I haven't been for 5 years, but have been catching up with all the people that I know there over Zoom and stuff. Over the last few weeks, I'm writing a story about somewhere I've not been for years. And I managed to sell a story last summer to Fodas that I actually wrote about 5 or 6 years ago, after I'd had the experience I think it was in Antwerp. I wrote the story way back then, and it sat in my Google Drive for years. And it was always quite a fun story. It was a bit ridiculous. It was a bit silly. And I never really found the right place for it. And eventually last summer, I saw Fodas put a call out for, bizarre, random experiences in Europe. And I was like, yes, that's this. So I managed to sell that story that I had already written and didn't really have to do much work on, apart from chatting to a few people to make it a bit more current. So that was quite good. And so yeah, I've definitely I've had to pivot, and I've had to use my intuition a little bit, I guess.
And this is a question from Imi. When you have a niche and you're a freelancer, do you pitch to more than one place at once?
I wouldn't. I certainly wouldn't pitch the same story to one place, to multiple places. I do know people that do that, and often if they do get commissioned by 1 or 2 or 3 publications, they'll just try and sort of spin the story in 3 different ways and make it as different as possible. But I personally don't do that, and I don't think that's a very clever practice. I think if you're pitching a story to a publication, it's because that publication is the right place for that story. And so if you're then just copying and pasting that pitch, if you're pitching the Guardian and the Telegraph and the Times and a magazine, then with that same story, you haven't really thought it through, and you haven't really tailored that story for that publication. And so I don't think that that's necessarily a clever thing to do. And it can also burn bridges. If you get commissioned by one publication to say, to do this particular story, but you've sent that pitch out to multiple publications, if you then get an offer of the same story commissioned from another publication, then you've now got 2 publications, and you've got to choose which one you're going to do it for. And to have to go back to an editor and say, oh, sorry, I'm actually now doing this for somebody else because I pitched it at the same time, you're going to look like a bit of an idiot, I think. And I don't think editors really appreciate that. I did, when I was an editor way back at Rough Guides, I had that a couple of times, and often it was because I would not respond for 3 weeks to an email, and so that person's gone away and pitched it elsewhere, which is absolutely fair enough. But if I've got back to someone immediately and said, yes, I want this story, and they've gone, oh, sorry, this person got in there first, I'm sort of like, well, I'm not impressed by that, because you're offering me something that I now can't have, and it doesn't feel very professional.
Neef, I can see you nodding away in agreement. Is there anything you want to add on that?
Yeah, no, I just really agree with what Lottie was saying. I think, it can be, especially when you're at the start of the career, you do really want to try and build solid and strong relationships with people. And yeah, I think that kind of double pitching can often lead to a lot of stress, namely for yourself as well. I feel like if you pitch to a few places and you have a few places say yes, it can be a bit overwhelming. So I'd say the one thing that you probably have as a journalist or a writer is like a bunch of ideas. So there's nothing wrong with pitching numerous places, different ideas at the same time. I always feel like you're better off doing that and having the problem of writing 2 or 3 things at once, as opposed to, potentially burning bridges with people who you really would hope to work with in the future. So yeah, I'd say pitch one story to one place and kind of keep it like that. And keep it straightforward like that, I think. Because I think often it can come out of like almost like maybe excitement, like you really are desperate to try and tell this story in so many different places, or you just want to tell this story in general, so you end up pitching it to 3 or 4 places. But the outcome of that is really good. I think, as Lottie was mentioning, like you can wait if there's like 2 weeks go past, 3 weeks go past, and you don't hear anything back, then you can take it to somewhere else. And often I'll even drop in notes to an editor and say, look, I've decided to move this pitch on to somewhere else because I can see maybe you're a bit busy and you haven't got time in the minute. That's no problem at all. And just try and be really transparent with things. And I think transparency in whatever field you work in, I think, is like greatly appreciated. So I'd say, yeah, no double pitching, essentially.
Brilliant. Right, I'm going to open up the conversation to everyone watching on Zoom at home now. So you can raise your hand digitally on Zoom or put a question in the chat, and we'll read it out. So I'll give everyone a. Oh, I think we've already got one, have we? Perhaps not. So I'll let everyone have a think on some questions. But in the meantime, I've got one. How do you characterize your job? I mean, do you love it? Is it hard? Ellen, I'm going to start with you.
Both. I absolutely love it. I think one thing that I love the most is I love my job being what's kind of going on around you all the time. So the fact that like the main talking points, you're like, yeah, you're kind of always on top of things, if that makes sense, or like first to things, which is what I really love. And I love sometimes like being sat around the table, and I know like some people always say like, oh, what story are you working on today? And you're like, oh, well, you know, last week I interviewed so-and-so, and it's just really fun, exciting. People kind of want to hear about it, and that's one of the things that I love the most. But I also, yeah, just it is obviously extremely hard work. And I think one of the hardest things about it can be the, particularly working on a national daily, is the daily deadlines. And, you know, sometimes, I think there was one actually in November time, I think it was November, I went to the I'm Celebrity Get Me Out of Here Castle up in Wales. Great day out. And we went and did a set visit and spoke to some of the producers and things. It was absolutely brilliant. But I was then on the train back from Wales back down to London. And at the same time, just obviously being TV, I was writing up a piece for that, for tomorrow's paper, and this is about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Then it came out that Katia Jones had got COVID, so was out of Strictly. Massive story for us. And I was also writing up another story that was on Audition for that day. So I was like, okay, so ideally these stories need to be filed by 6. My train gets in at 5:30. I need to get writing. So it's kind of can be the tricky part sometimes when you're thinking, right, these are 3 really big stories, and prioritizing your time as well, particularly. So that's where it's the hard side of things, but also at the same time, I love it. And I love being able to kind of talk to people about what I'm up to. And every day is different, which is, as I'm sure the others will agree, that's the best part of the job. You're never sat doing the same story. Yeah, it's totally different events to go to. It's brilliant. Yeah. Hopefully that definitely gets my enthusiasm across.
Brilliant. We've got a question from someone at home. What are your thoughts on sending with okay, yeah. Well, the question was, what are your thoughts on sending different pictures at once to the same publication? I think we've just covered that really, and I think the general consensus was don't send the same pitch twice. I
think they're asking if you can send multiple pitches to one editor at once. I think that's what the question is. So, I would say yes. I don't know how it works in Neve's niche, and I don't know if that's what you would do or what your editors would expect, Eleanor. But in travel in particular, you know, when you're sending pitches, it sort of depends what your stories are and what your ideas are and who you're pitching and what kind of stories you're pitching. But ultimately, if you have got a few ideas that might work for that one publication, then there's absolutely no harm in putting them all in one email. I mean, I certainly wouldn't send 10, but maybe 2 or 3, maybe 4 at a push. It at least shows that you've got lots of ideas, and you've probably got more chance of getting a commission if you can show that you've got a number of ideas and maybe the editor likes one but the others aren't quite right. So, and it's quite common practice in travel to send multiple pitches, especially because the way my job works is that I'll often plan sort of 3 to 6 months of travel in advance, and so I'll know exactly where I'm going and what I'm going to be doing, and so then I can come up with all the ideas around that and pitch them out to editors. And so I'll send an email to one editor, and it might include ideas, a couple of ideas from one destination, another idea from another, and another idea from another place. So it sort of it does depend on the editor, though. I know some editors don't like having multiple pitches in one email. Some of them want you to send one at a time or whatever. But I mean, it's always good to get to know the editor a little bit before you start pitching them, so you can find that sort of thing out. But in my industry, it's definitely quite common to send multiple ideas all at once.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, I mean, Neve, just to go back to the last question, how do you characterize your job? Because it's not only you don't only work for newspapers, but you've also worked in sort of commercial side, Nike, Netflix.
Yeah, so it's a weird one. I never really know what to call myself in the like totality, if that makes sense. But I think that is kind of evident of how jobs are changing in this like time pre-COVID, but probably exacerbated more by COVID, is that people are doing so many different things that maybe have like thematical similarities, but aren't necessarily the same thing. So I never really know what to call myself there. But I think I do really enjoy what I do. And I think I think all of the commercial stuff and all of the extra stuff that I've done all started because of the kind of culture journalism and the culture writing and the music writing. So I think one thing I didn't realize is how transferable like skills in journalism and in writing are to other fields and to other like vocations. So as a freelancer, I was like trying to make sure like I have a nice spread of stuff that I can do, like not in case of a pandemic, because I could never predict the pandemic, but when the pandemic happened, it meant that, okay, like if there's not much journalism work going on, I can do some commercial work. If there's no commercial work, I can just focus solely on journalism and stuff like that. But I think in my case, it all started from doing like kind of really drilling down into the niches we were kind of talking about, and from having those examples of work out in the world where it may be like an interview with like the Aniefiok family, or it may be like a Guardian profile of a Heady One or something like that. That then meant that certain commercial outlets like Nike or Netflix were then reaching out to me because they're like, okay, we actually need somebody with an expertise on this subject. Are you able to help us out? It may be on like a documentary that they're doing, which I did like a video essay for Netflix about Top Boy and like the pressures of masculinity. But that all came from the work I was doing on the culture side of things with Nike. And often now, if you are interested in culture journalism, is that a lot of the people that when I've been covering are also working with a lot of these brands. So somebody like Dave, who won, I think it was at the Brit Awards last year, but I did his first interview for Vice like in 2017. And then so now he's like this big global superstar, and Nike are working with him, and they're like, okay, we need somebody to talk to him for a documentary wedding with him, and you seem to have a good rapport with him. So it's kind of one of those things of kind of keep focused in what you're doing. You never know what opportunities will come off of the back of it. I think also, just quickly in regards to Lola's question, I saw there may be an angle she was asking about pitching different editors at the same publication. And I think I'd encourage that, because that's only something I've really realized in the past 2 years, is that something like The Guardian, for example, you have the umbrella of The Guardian, but then The Guardian is broken up into loads of smaller publications. So you have like the music desk, you have the arts desk, you have the Guardian Guide, you have the Observer magazine, which is like a monthly, then you have like the Observer News Review, which is like a weekly kind of their weekly supplement. So all of these different branches will have different editors, and they'll be looking for different things. So you can pitch them at the same time, usually not the same idea as we kind of covered before, but I think it's okay to pitch these different editors at the same time with varying pitches. So I think there's been times where I've been working across like 2 or 3 different Guardian kind of publications on different stories. So it might be like I'm doing a music profile for the music desk, and I'm doing like an actor's profile for the Observer News Review, and I've got another profile for the Observer Monthly. So I'd encourage that, because building up those relationships with all of them actually kind of helps in the long run, because they are actively reading each other's work and reading what the others are commissioning. So if you can kind of forge relationships with those across there, and they often move across within those buildings as well in their own roles. So keeping those relationships and reaching out and building those relationships with a few different people is something to be encouraged, I say.
Brilliant, thank you. And how different, this is Camilla's question, How different is writing for somewhere like GQ compared to The Guardian?
Yeah, quite different, I would say. The Guardian was probably the most valuable place I've been writing, I'd say, because I think with The Guardian, one thing that is very different for them is that it's their audience is so broad that although you may have a niche interest, you have to find a way to explain facets of this niche interest. So, for example, say if I interviewed a rapper called Nines, and he's from Canton Estate in Northwest London. And although I've been listening to Nines since I was like 14, so I can tell you about his music inside out, someone who picks up the Guardian paper and may read that supplement has no idea who he is. So I need to be able to contextualize who he is, why his music and work is important, and why it kind of is resonating with so many people. So that is like a good challenge in a way that kind of pushes you to progress your kind of the skills you have and stuff like that. Whereas in comparison to the GQ seems to have like a lot longer lead times if you're writing for the magazine, for example. So they have like digital and print, as a lot of places do. If you're writing for the print section, you usually have quite a long lead time and quite flexible word counts. So the first GQ piece I filed was 3,000 words. I think that's the longest profile I've done, whereas The Guardian, you're usually looking at anywhere between 800 and maybe 2,000, and that is on quite a quicker turnaround. Whereas GQ, I think, had about 2 months to write 3,000 words, which is kind of like unheard of in what I've been doing so far. So they are quite different in ways. They are quite similar in ways too, in that as well as GQ, you do need to contextualize. I feel like GQ, you're able to, I guess, weave in a bit more of your own voice into your writing and stuff like that. Whereas The Guardian, is really important that before anything else, you have the facts straight and you are being able to convey like why this specific topic is of news, is newsworthy, for example. Whereas GQ is more of a magazine, so it's not necessarily about news in that way. Yeah.
Brilliant. And just as I can see we're drawing to a close, we're almost at 12 o'clock. Are you available for students to contact you if they are looking for advice? And what's the best way to contact each of you? Eleanor, I'll start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I found it absolutely invaluable to have kind of someone to go to, and it was like contacts that I'd kind of made through work experience and things like that, who I still keep in touch with today, bounce off for ideas, or even just having like some career advice, because obviously I'm really young into this as well, so I haven't been doing it that long, so I find that really, really helpful. Definitely either via my email address, Twitter, anything, do get in touch, because it's really helpful just to have like a sounding board sometimes for people to come to you with. And even if it's not about, it doesn't have to be about TV and radio, it might just be like, should I do journalism at university? Should I, what would your advice be? I did news associates. If people looking to a journalism course, I can give guidance on that. So yeah, it's definitely, I love it when people feel like they could reach out and just want a chat or some guidance.
Brilliant. And Lottie, how about you?
Yeah, definitely. I think for me the way I got into this industry really was with the contacts that I made while I was at university. So I am always more than happy for people to get in touch. Travel is it's not a hugely diverse and it's not a hugely young industry. So we need more young people. Please get in touch if you're young and fresh and you've got exciting ideas. I'm definitely up for chatting. You're probably best to find me on Twitter, and then maybe we can chat on Zoom or on email or whatever. But yeah, find me on Twitter first.
Brilliant. And Aniefiok, I'll come to you.
Yeah, I'd say exactly the same. They're definitely more than up for speaking to people. Definitely reach out. Twitter is probably where you'll find me best. And then from there, we can jump on the emails or jump onto the Zoom or something like that. I think I'd also say for people to looking into getting into cultural journalism, I say your Twitter has been really valuable for me. I think all of the work I've pretty much got has been through Twitter in some shape or form. So, and I think it's just good. It's a good platform to be talking about the interests that you want to necessarily go on to write about. So yeah, reach out to me on there and send along your work, whatever it is, questions, anything like that.
Brilliant, thank you. So I'm afraid we've come to the end of the session. It's been a brilliant discussion. Thank you for that. And thank you to all our panelists for sharing their experience and views. And to everyone at home, who's watching and has asked questions. I hope you've enjoyed it, and feel free to tweet us at SPA Journalism on Twitter. Tell us how amazing the panel was, please. Our next panel begins at 2 p.m. and is about freelance journalism, and we'll be hearing from Alistair Lane, Caroline Harrop, Mahika Barua, and Steve Rose. So see you then. Thank you very much. Thank you, guys. Cheers. I'll let Ben finish the live stream.